Hello and welcome to this WTR Symposium podcast series. You're tuning into the second podcast installment of Critical Elements, Mining and Processing Infrastructure Build-Out, a Matter of National Security. Definitely go back and check out the last week's version of this, and you can get part one through the podcast that way. Again, this is part two, and I'm your host, Shawn Severson, co-founder and CEO of Water Tower Research. My co-host today is Dmitry Silversteyn, Senior Chemicals and Materials Technology Analyst here at Water Tower Research. We've got a great group of senior management for our event today, so let's get started. I'll start out, Dmitry. Why don't you kick things off and walk us through today's company lineup?
Absolutely, Shawn. As you already mentioned, if you haven't already, please listen to the first podcast or the first part of the two-part symposium series, which dropped last week. For that, we interviewed the managements from the Metals Company, Westwater Resources, Avalon Advanced Materials, Northern Graphite, and Odyssey Marine Exploration. Now, for the second part of our WTR Symposium on Critical Elements, we will speak with senior management of Jindalee Lithium, Critical Metals Corporation, Tactical Resources, and 5E Advanced Materials. Also, Atlas Lithium, while unable to participate in this podcast symposium directly, have provided their take on the topics we'll be discussing, and their responses will be included in a written report we will publish following the symposium. These companies are at the forefront of developing critical elements resources in North and South America, Europe, and friendly Asian Pacific island nations, along with the processing and refining infrastructure needed to secure true material independence from China, and doing so while minimizing the impact on the environment and disruption to indigenous communities. From Jindalee Lithium, ticker JLL, Ian Rogers, Chief Executive Officer, is joining us. Jindalee Lithium is developing a resource, a McDermott project in Oregon, which may turn out to be one of the largest clay-based lithium deposits in North America. From Critical Metals, ticker CRML, we have Tom McNamara, who is head of corporate development and investor relations. Critical Metals is currently developing a rare earth elements resource in Greenland and a spodumene-based lithium resource in Australia in an effort to loosen Chinese grip on these critical elements. From Tactical Resources, ticker RARE, we're pleased to welcome Ranjit Sundar, Chief Executive Officer. Tactical Resources is developing a US-based resource of rare earth elements down in Texas to help break the Chinese grip on the REE market. And from 5E Advanced Materials, ticker FEAM, we welcome Paul Weibel, Chief Executive Officer. 5E Advanced Materials is an exploration stage company which engages in the development of boron and lithium properties in Australia and the United States, and focuses on supplying boron specialty chemicals complemented by lithium production as a byproduct. As a reminder, our content at Water Tower Research is entirely open access. It can be found at our website, www.watertowerresearch.com. For those with access, investors can also find our content on research aggregators such as FactSet and Bloomberg. So with that, Shawn, let's get started.
Our next guest is Ian Rogers, Chief Executive Officer of Jindalee Lithium, which trades on the Australian Stock Exchange under the ticker JLL and on the OTC under the ticker JNDAF. Jindalee Lithium is developing its McDermott project, one of the largest lithium resources in North America, located in Oregon on the border with Nevada and adjacent to Lithium America's Thacker Pass property. I'm going to start, Ian, could you please tell the audience a little bit more about your background and what Jindalee Lithium is trying to accomplish with respect to development of a clay-based lithium resource in continental U.S.? Also, I understand the company announced a merger just recently, so perhaps you can provide a brief overview of that pending transaction and how it affects the development timeline at McDermott, and then I'll turn it over to Dmitry for the rest of the questions.
No problem, Shawn, and thank you for having me. In terms of my background, I'm a mining engineer by training. I cut my teeth at a company called Rio Tinto in major greenfield projects across a number of mine builds early in my career. I then transitioned into investment banking, merchant banking in the resources space globally in London and then in Australia. Most recently, I was part of the senior leadership team of a company called Oz Minerals, which was taken over by BHP about 2 years ago for about bit under $10 billion Australian. And then after that, I was looking for compelling opportunities where I could leverage my skill set. Got to know Lindsay, our biggest shareholder, and the board at Jindalee, and saw a really compelling opportunity with the McDermott lithium project, a really sort of mismatch in value on what is really strategic asset, with a couple of really key tailwinds in terms of lithium demand and also the geopolitical overlay and the market structure. And so I joined the business at the start of 2024 and have over the past 18 months or so, led the company and delivered the pre-feasibility study. And so, I guess building on your comments then, Shawn, around the company, just to reiterate, McDermott is our flagship project. We completed a pre-feasibility study on that at the tail end of last year. That outlined a very, very large scale, long life, multi-generational asset that has potential to produce battery grade lithium chemicals in the US, and that's really important. It's the mining and the processing, and I'm sure we'll get into that a bit more on why that is so important through this conversation. But what do people say their assets are strategic? McDermott truly is. It's been recognised as one of the first 10 projects in the Fast 41 permitting initiative, and has a real potential to make a difference for the US. What we're working through at the moment, you touched on the transaction. I guess the compelling opportunity for investors at the moment is that super strategic asset. We traded a fraction of our value of our peers, but we've got a number of major catalysts in the pipeline, including on the project level, permitting milestones, and as well as project-related study work that's underway. And on top of that, like you said, we've announced this SPAC transaction, a merger transaction whereby we'll vend in our US assets into a US listed SPAC company at a significant higher look-through value than our current market cap on the ASX, and in the process raise the funding required to materially advance the McDermott project through feasibility study and towards production. So really, positive development for the company. There's a lot of work to do to get that transaction to completion, but it's pleasingly supported by a sponsor that is a multi-billion-dollar fund. So really excited about that, and think that we're really well placed, particularly as the lithium market comes off multi-year lows. We're one of the sort of few more advanced assets in the US that could really add value to the US's desire to de-risk its critical minerals supply chains.
Thank you, Ian, for that overview. And obviously, we find the transaction with the SPAC company very encouraging, as it does separate the North American asset and upgrades the listing as well as provide funds for the development of the McDermott project. Just to put that in perspective for people, you talked about this being a multi-generational project. Can you talk a little bit about the lithium market in kind of general structure, what the current business environment is like? What are some of the near-term and longer-term drivers, and perhaps who are some of the top players are, and where a lot of the processing takes place, regardless of where the mining takes place?
I guess I'll start with the market structure. The lithium market, there's a key differentiation between mine supply and chemical supply. Most of the lithium comes out of either Australia or South America, from hard rock in Australia or typically brine operations in South America. But the Chinese control 70% of the lithium chemical market. That's because they control the processing. So, for example, basically 95% of the lithium that's exported out of Australia is in the form of concentrate, which is shipped to China. That is then processed into battery grade lithium chemicals in China. And so we've really got this concentrated market. It's not mine supply; it's around the processing and refining to produce a battery grade lithium chemical. And the major players, I mean, there's major hard rock players in Australia, in the likes of Independence Group, Mineral Resources, Pilbara Minerals, and then globally, SQM, obviously a major player, as well as Albemarle. They're the top players. But in terms of the market structure, just to reiterate that point around processing, that's one of the strategic benefits of McDermott and projects like McDermott, in that it's the mining plus the processing to produce a battery-grade lithium chemical in the United States. So it really provides that decoupling from that Chinese control on the supply chain, which we've seen the result of that over the last couple of years. And so the projects that can really deliver those chemicals into the US, that's the real strategic advantage of this project. In terms of our actual our project, it's one of the largest resources globally, but in the US, it's one of the largest, clearly. Lithium Americas, we touched on the Thacker Pass project. Ours is a similar deposit, both in size and style, but theirs is the largest lithium deposit in the world. And I think the broader McDermott caldera, some people say it's bigger than the Atacama, so it's just giant, really huge. Our current JORC resource is 21.5 million tons of lithium carbonate equivalent. Our initial pre-feasibility study we completed at the end of last year outlined a 63-year life, producing sort of 40,000 tons a year of lithium carbonate. That's material, given that the current market's around, say, 1.5 million tons a year. So it's a big project. And that really was only based off using 10 to 15% of the resource base. So really, just scratching the surface of this asset, and one that could have a material impact to decoupling that sort of stranglehold China has on the chemical market.
Thank you, Ian. So from what I'm hearing is it doesn't really matter where the material is mined currently. The way the industry is set up, it still goes through China. So having a North American-based mine is a first step. But can you talk about sort of the importance of establishing more of an ecosystem of processing supply chain that you can actually get from the mine to the battery material, eventually to the battery?
No, it's a very good point, because I think not only does the Chinese control the lithium chemical stuff, they also control the battery supply chain as well. A lot of the large cell producers and the cathode manufacturers are all in China, and so the need for the US to really reduce the risk and decouple those supply chains is that you need to be able to produce battery-grade lithium chemicals. That's the first step, and then you need the midstream to produce the cathode and precursor products that go into making batteries. Then you need the battery manufacturing. Historically, through the IRA and other drivers, there was a lot of gigafactories stood up, etc. But what's missing is really the mining, refining, and the midstream, and we're starting to see some players sort of build that out. And that's really where the focus needs to be to reduce the risk and build those supply chains, so that you can take the lithium out of the ground at say McDermott, and then put it into batteries that are made in the US, and particularly of importance to the US is their use in particularly in defense and other applications. But there needs to be this ecosystem that can deliver that for national security.
Absolutely makes sense, Ian. Given all of that, what do you think some of the obstacles? I mean, obviously there's a will, certainly in the private industry, and it looks like, broadly speaking, in the political world as well, to establish or to execute such a decoupling from China and other less than friendly regimes around the world. What are some of the obstacles to domesticating a supply chain when according to some people I spoke with, we kind of lost a lot of the expertise and capabilities since the days when we were a mining and an exporting power, we being the United States. So what do you think it will take to get this up and running, and what do you think the government role in this should be?
It's good question. I don't know if I have all the answers. I think from my perspective, there's a couple of key challenges. One is capital availability, and I mean that's part of driving this transaction that I touched on the top. Trying to tap some of the emerging US interest in hard assets and things aligned to these really important critical minerals themes. So I think that's actually shifting, and so we're looking to capture that interest and being able to raise the additional capital to be able to push McDermott forward through the pre-development phases. I think the other one of the key challenges in the US is the regulatory regime and the time to get permitting. It's sort of widely understood that it takes a lot longer in the US than it does in other places like Australia, for example. That is that's improving. We've seen obviously this Fast 41 initiatives. That there's a sort of bipartisan push at the moment to look at other ways to how we could speed that up without compromising on standards. And so I think the direction of travel is good on that. I think the jury's out on if we'll see some tangible improvement on that. But that's certainly a challenge compared to other jurisdictions. I think you touched on some of the skilled labor and whatnot. I think there's opportunity to really through increased economic activity, both from the mining, refining, and on the battery side. There's a real opportunity to build out that skilled labor base. I think in some pockets, the US is spoilt for that sort of expertise. In other areas, it's not. But I see that as an opportunity. And then in terms of the government's role, I think you've seen historically, there's been the US government's provided concessional type loans through the Department of Energy to some of our peers in Lithium Americas and in Ioneer and others, and that's certainly a big step up, because particularly the mining is a capital intensive game, particularly the processing side of it, and so those sort of providing those funding opportunities for these big projects that can help produce chemicals is really important. And so I think that going forward is going to be an area that that they'll continue to support. But we've seen recently on this MP Materials deal that this administration is taking a bit more of a creative view. They've put in debt there, they've put in equity, and importantly, they put in an offtake there to really stand up that business in an area that's particularly acute with Chinese control. So I think there's been announced a number of funding coming through the Big Beautiful Bill. Ultimately, that'll get clarified, the exact opportunities. But we're sort of pretty excited that this administration and from a bipartisan point of view, there's a really strong willingness to accelerate some of this domestic mining and processing.
Thank you, Ian, for sharing with us your perspective on the industry and Jindalee Lithium specifically. We wish you luck in developing this project and look forward to continuing to receive positive news as you progress through your growth phase.
Well, thank you for having me, and look forward to catching up.
Our next guest is Tom McNamara, Head of Corporate Development, Investor Relations of Critical Metals Corp, which trades on NASDAQ under the ticker CRML. Critical Minerals is developing a rare earth elements, or REE, resource in Greenland and spodumene-based lithium resource in Australia in an effort to loosen China's grip on the critical elements. Tom, I'm going to start with the first question, if you don't mind. Could you tell us a little bit about your background and what Critical Metals is trying to accomplish with respect to the development of rare earth elements and a lithium resource, and in particular to support North American and European move towards critical metal independence? And then I'll turn it over to Dmitry.
Great. Thank you, Shawn and Water Tower. I'm Tom McNamara. I recently joined Critical Metals. We're a young company and new management, but I spent the last 30 plus years on Wall Street. I started out as a sell-side metals and mining analyst in the early 90s, studied mining engineering and mineral economics at Columbia, and then spent over 20 years at hedge funds covering all cyclicals, especially metals and mining. what brought me here into critical metals, and particularly it was the right time. Again, following metals and mining for over 30 years, it never seemed the right time for rare earths. I literally watched over the years as China grew and took complete dominance over the markets. And I've seen Main Pass or Mountain Pass go through bankruptcy several times in my career. But now I couldn't be more excited about the opportunity set from the micro to the macro, and what Critical Metals Corp is bringing to the world. I consider it a solution to the issue of China having a stranglehold on the market for such essential, literally critical minerals and materials that function our modern age, whether it's the phones we're all holding now or aerospace, defense, satellites, robots. These are all very, very important materials. We're an emerging producer. We have our Tambreez deposit in Greenland is one of the most prolific, largest deposits on the planet. We obviously have the proximity, but it is what I call a mining engineer's dream. I think it will be ultimately the cleanest, greenest, most modular mine on the planet out of anything mined on the planet. And again, we are the solution. We could literally provide any market outside of China 100% of their rare earths needs over time. And that is our goal and our commitment, and we're rapidly moving towards that process.
Thank you, Tom, for that summary. Very helpful. You alluded to this earlier, but in your comment, but I just want you to maybe come back and provide a little bit more granularity for our listeners in terms of talking about the rare earths and the lithium deposits that you're developing. In terms of the structure of the market, you talked about the Chinese domination. Perhaps you can expand on that a little bit. And what are the current sort of business environment and near-term and midterm drivers and outlook for both metal prices and demand for these metals?
I'll start with Wolfsburg, which is our lithium deposit in Tambreez. It's more than a deposit, it's a mine. It's a lithium mine, which will be the first domestically produced and consumed, dedicated to the EV market in Europe. The mine, as I said, the mine is in Austria. It's in a historic mining district. It's an underground mine, a very small footprint. We have an offtake agreement with BMW to take 100% of the first phase of Wolfsburg. And we also entered into a joint venture with Obakin, which is a Saudi group, which is going to process the lithium concentrate, which we produce in Austria, in Saudi Arabia, up to battery grade hydrate, which will go back to BMW to however they decide to use that for their domestic battery production. That I think that's worth covering, because we have a joint venture with the Saudi government, which is a 50-50 on the processing plant. So we will contribute, we will be able to share in 50% of the profitability. But importantly, we're being carried on the CapEx from a financing standpoint. And obviously, Austria and Germany have some of the highest power costs in the world. The low-cost power is in Saudi Arabia. So basically from that, the lesson is we're miners. We like to have some idea of where our product is going and responsibility for that, but we would be more equity participation rather than operator, anything downstream. And we're basically waiting for the Saudis to come up on the hydrate plant, and the BMW offtake is in 2027. So that everything's going well. We're fully permitted, financed. We're just waiting for all the supply chain to fall into place. The Tambreez deposit is early days, but from our ownership and participation, but it's a rare earths mine. It literally, the importance recently is our heavy components of the rare earths of the Tambreez deposit is increasing, particularly gallium, which was the first thing that China decided to absolutely ban exports. And that's one that we've been getting a tremendous amount of interest from potential off-takers. as our gallium. Although it's debatable whether it's a heavy rare earth or not, it's a very, very important one. And that rare earths, not only the components and the proximity and the mining, and another very, very important thing about the Tambreez deposit is it is a very low grade, what I would call norms, naturally occurring radioactive material. Thorium and uranium is very low, so we can do all the processing on site in Greenland without chemicals. We're going to use magnetic separation. And that is also one of the more favorable aspects of the deposit in terms of just the minerals within the deposit. So that is going to be it. So as I said, one of the things that is the modular aspect of the mine is we're in Southwest Greenland. There's a large fjord. The importance of that is it's big enough to take Panamax ships. We expect that our infrastructure is mostly, if not all, going to be floating. This is nothing new. This has been done all over the world, particularly in the oil and gas industry for decades. So we can have floating infrastructure or docking, obviously for the port, for storage, for quarters, and for other aspects. And again, if you think about that, there's potential financing opportunities. The mine has almost no, the asset has almost no strip ratio. The mining is very simple in terms of moving earth around. There was not virtually no strip ratio. Importantly, we have gravity in our favor. The resource base slopes upwardly away from the mine. The importance of that is over time, we can use conveyor systems, which are very low cost and efficient. They are run on electricity. As I said earlier, I think this could be the cleanest and greenest mine on the planet. You have abundant hydro and geothermal opportunity and existing in Greenland. We expect that the mine will be run on a combination of hydro, geothermal, and tidal for almost 100% of the power of the mine. And again, very low strip ratio, very clean processing. It's going to be one of the cleanest mines on the planet, if not the cleanest mine on the planet.
Thank you, Tom. That's a very good description of what you guys are doing, and I'm happy to hear the amount of forethought and planning that has already got into thinking about the processing of these minerals and these metals. You've made a point of talking about the mine in Austria for lithium, the processing of that and the upgrading of that to battery grade chemicals being done in Saudi Arabia. So clearly you're going out of your way to avoid the Chinese supply chain when it comes to developing these resources. What do you think what do you think people should take away from these efforts to kind of decouple from the Chinese, Indonesian, Democratic Republic of the Congo, these problematic areas, both in terms of geopolitics and in terms of environmental and just social responsibility, if you will. And what is the impetus for you to establish a non-Chinese based supply chain for these metals?
Those are great points, Dmitry. I think that kind of the macro situation, as we think of it, is unfolding into three specific but very important layers. There's the obvious. They control 90+% of the market. Everybody agrees to that. Layer two, in our mind, is what is the cost of that? I have seen, when I first started going to China in the late 90s and early 2000s, what some of these rare earth mines look like. And it looks like an apocalyptic, futuristic movie battle scene. It's just scorched earth, massive devastation to the environment, wildlife, and to the cost of living all over China. And that's why I think that's one of the reasons why the government controls 100% of that industry. And that is unlike any other natural resource industry in China. There's a stranglehold on it. So that's two. There's an environmental. There's a massive environmental layer of this. The third layer in our mind is the geopolitical risk standpoint. Much, if not all, of the heavy rare earths on the planet come from a very specific portion of China and Myanmar or Burma. It is one of the most dangerous, lawless places in the world. There's literally slave labor, warlords, and militias all over. And the geopolitical is what is actually going on there. And I think that it is such a serious threat that it was easy for China to ban export on certain heavy rare earths. I think there were actually supply issues. Now, that's me talking, but I think that's a factor, a potentially large factor here. And the question is, how much resource do they have? Now, things in rare earths are very small. They're small. Our deposit's huge, but typically a deposit is small and short-lived. So I think the layer one is China controls the market. We can't do that anymore. And it's unbelievably environmentally detrimental to the world. And three, there's a massive aspect of instability that we don't exactly know that we can bank on that supply, and we don't know how much resource they actually have longer term. So there is no doubt that the efforts for the West and the US and the EU and Critical Metals Corp, the need to diversify away from China, period. Pricing doesn't matter, convenience doesn't matter, none of that matters. This pivot has happened, and it's not turning back.
Understood, Tom. That was a very good summary, and I appreciate you laying it out in such a way. I think it's very comprehensible to people, even casual listeners who are getting their first exposure to this industry. Just to follow up on that, China did get into this business in a big way for a couple of decades now before we even realized that things were going astray. Now, the world is scrambling. The Western economies are scrambling to set up their own supply chains that are independent of China, or as much independent of China as possible. What are some of the obstacles that you see that are either industrial or structural to setting up such a supply chain outside of China?
I think it's important for the audience, for all to understand that there are no technological barriers for the US or the EU to be where China is now in terms of their capabilities. There is not some secret sauce or something we don't understand. It's a matter of they were willing to be the low-cost provider at any cost. Let them have it. Our only barrier is our willingness to do it. There are technical challenges. We're the most technically advanced country in the world. I think that will continue, and rare earths will not stop that. So there's a matter of figuring this out and figuring out it quickly, and a lot of companies know how to do that, and those are companies that we will be working with through this whole solution for the supply chain.
Thank you, Tom. That's encouraging to hear. And just final question before we end this. Can you talk about what role, if any, you think the governments should play in developing or helping to develop these supply chains that are independent of China, whether it's federal government or state government levels? What are they doing now, and what do you think they should be doing more of or less of in a perfect world?
We consider government to be participants or partners, as our suppliers and future customers will be. This is a participating team effort to do this. The government has been very open and willing to do this. This predates the current administration. This has been going on since the 2010s. And has dug in pretty persistently to continue this. And we've seen the funds. Funds are not an issue. The government's intent is not an issue. It's really a matter of timing. And specifically, we have an XM loan and crediting facility, which we were very happy about and continue to, again, be partners with them. We continue to talk to the DOW or DOD, whatever we're calling the former Defense Department. And we will continue to talk to the two governments at a federal and state level. Our UCOR announcement several weeks ago is a DOD funded project in Louisiana. So that's we clearly spoke to Louisiana. That's part state and local. Federal is a major part of this whole solution process. And Europe, it's timing. They've just been behind where the US is, but the US is moving very quickly, and we're fully going to participate in that process.
Thank you, Tom. That was very helpful. I appreciate you taking the time to explain to our audience what Critical Metals is doing to help support the Western economy's drive for independence when it comes to critical metals.
Thank you.
Our next guest speaker is Ranjit Sundar, Chief Executive Officer of Tactical Resources Corporation, which trades on TSX Ventures under the ticker RARE, and on the OTC under the ticker USREF. Tactical Resources is developing a US-based resource of rare earth elements down in Texas, actually, to help break the Chinese grip on the REE market. Ranjit, please tell the audience a little bit about yourself and background and what Tactical Resources is trying to do, especially with respect to the development of rare earth element resources in the U.S. for investors.
Thanks, Shawn. Ranjit, as we all know now, I'm the CEO of Tactical. Tactical's been around for about 4 years. My background has been capital markets, mining, and seed-driven positions. I've taken several projects to production throughout my career. That means navigating development of the asset, economic studies of the asset, permitting, offtake, run the gamut. I've done some business in some challenging jurisdictions, Mongolia, Indonesia, Mexico, and it's a pleasure for me to be in the USA building this company in an area where the jurisdiction is clear, the permitting is clear, and the ambiguity is much less.
I appreciate that, Ranjit. This is Dmitry. Thank you for joining us today. Can you provide our audience with a little bit of an overview of the rare earth elements market? I mean, people know that it's very concentrated in the hands of China, but can you talk about sort of maybe the size of the market, where some of the main drivers of demand are, and what are people trying to do to get away or from under the Chinese grip in this industry?
Yeah, sure. I'd love to. I think I'll open with a little bit more about what we're doing, so it'll fit into the answer better. We're developing a rare earth project in Texas where our goal is to be a supplier of rare earths and then develop a partnership with a magnet manufacturer to deliver what the US incredibly needs right now. From day one, we've operated with 3 pillars. First and foremost, American assets for American supply and American production. Secondly, we're focused on advanced assets that we can fast track to production. And lastly, and most importantly, we want to target projects that lend themselves to clean processing. That being said, what's happening in the industry? It's quite captivating. The US imports approximately 80% of its rare earth feed from China. This massive supply gap positions Tactically perfectly as a US-focused rare earth company with an existing operational mine to fit this critical need.
So when you talk about the existing mine, I'm assuming you're referring to your Peak project down in Texas. Can you talk a little bit more about what the status of that mine is and whether it's still in operations or whether your plan is to take the existing tailings that have built up over the years of mine's operation and extract rare earths from there?
Yes, for sure. The key word is fast track. And the reason we can fast track is our Peak project in Texas outside of El Paso has been operating for 20 years. Up until right now, it's operating. They're crushing rocks for the Union Pacific Railroad. Part of the tailings or waste product of that crushing is an enriched rare earth product. So on a daily basis, that tailings pile is growing. There's currently enough tailings there for a decade worth of production. Our job at Tactical is to take that material, process it in a cost-effective, clean way, and deliver it to the various magnet manufacturers and partners in the US.
Understood, Richie. So can you share with us sort of some of the background on, or some of the reasons behind, you mentioned the critical need that magnets have in the economy, particularly as we get more and more electricity centered rather than fossil fuel centered as a source of energy. But what role do rare earths play in magnets, and why is it so important to have production in the US for these materials?
Sure, it's a bit of a two-part answer. As I mentioned before, we're going to hear the word China a lot. China controls over 90% of the global rare earth supply. Most of the world's rare earth does come from China. There's only one current US producer, and that's MP Materials. Several more are needed, as well as beyond exploration and development, many more manufacturers are going to be needed. At Tactical, our PEAT project lends itself to a direct leach extraction process, one of the few in the world that Mother Nature has given us. So we fit very well into that supply chain. The demand side, I like to say that every time you touch a button on your phone or your laptop, there's a magnet behind it. That's an everyday use for you, me, and most families. Beyond that, magnets are driving AI chips, wind turbines, defense. An F-fighter jet requires 900 pounds of rare earth. A Virginia-class submarine, 9,200 pounds. The current administration has put forward multiple pieces of legislation, including Section 232 onto the critical mineral tariffs and executive orders under the production defense contract to enable US producers to fit a line into this value chain in the US.
Understood. What are, you mentioned some of the sort of the tailwinds as far as government clearing up their position with respect to the importance of these materials. You talked about in your introduction that you're glad to be in the US in a jurisdiction that it's a little bit more law abiding and where the regulatory path is a little clearer than some of the other places you've operated in. What are some of the obstacles that you see to setting up a domestic supply chain? Not so much from mining, but really processing and downstream ecosystem that would need to come into existence if we are to challenge China as a source of not just metals, but actual chemicals that these metals can be converted into to feed the electronics, the magnets, the semiconductor markets, not to mention the battery markets.
That's a great question. We're trying to address the critical national security with the need for American assets, American supply, and American production. What it's going to take is an ecosystem. Strategically located projects, advanced projects, and environmental sustainability. These projects sometimes require massive amounts of capital or in building entirely new mining operations. What we need is to leverage off existing infrastructure, go to operational mines like our Peak project, which can be operated in an environmentally friendly way, and put together a processing facility which lends itself, again, everything has to be environmentally friendly. The reason China dominates it is because they don't have the rules or the regulations or the oversight that they should have and that we have in the US. So Tactical Resources embodies this exact blueprint. We have an existing operational mine in Texas. We've proven that our retailings can be extracted, and we have a direct leaching process that bypasses traditional environmental challenges.
That's very good to hear. And I'm glad to hear you repeat environmentally friendly or minimizing carbon footprint, because I think in many cases, certainly to a casual observer, when you talk about mining or processing of minerals or metals, people don't think of it as particularly environmentally friendly, but you got to get it from somewhere, right? If it's not grown, it's mined, and you would much rather do it in a jurisdiction that does take environmental regulations seriously rather than pay lip service to them, as many other jurisdictions do. One final question I want to ask you is, and you referred to it earlier, obviously we've seen the U.S. government come in as an equity partner with MP Materials, who I think is the largest U.S. producer of rare earths currently. What else do you think federal or state governments can do to play a role to help facilitate the creation of this domestic elements processing facility, industry that we've been discussing? Besides sort of direct investments, is there anything else that the governments can do to make your job easier of bringing these assets online in a timely fashion?
The government is currently supporting the sector's supply chain. What can they do additionally? Well, currently, the National Energy Dominance Council has expedited permitting. That's the number one thing in our industry is permitting, be it a permit to drill, to crush rock, or to process. Permitting slows down projects for decades sometimes. Fortunately, we're in the state of Texas, where the government has granted 50,000 permits in the last 6 years. We believe government support in downstream processing facilities could be transformative for the sector and for companies like Tactical. I believe the government is looking into many different companies who want to do magnet processing and rare earth processing. And I would imagine in the coming years, you're going to see the sector grow exponentially.
Thank you for that. That's very helpful. I appreciate you joining our symposium and sharing your thoughts on the rare earth industry. And thank you very much for participating, Reggie.
It's a pleasure. In closing, Tactical Resources has the right asset in the right location with the right technology at exactly the right time where America needs to secure its rare earth supply chain. We're not just talking about it, we're positioned to deliver it.
Thank you very much for that.
Our next speaker is Paul Weibel, Chief Executive Officer of 5E Advanced Materials, which trades in the NASDAQ exchange under the ticker FEAM. It's engaged in the provision of boron and lithium properties in Australia and the United States. It focuses on supplying boron specialty materials, complemented by lithium co-product production. I'm going to start with the first question. Paul, could you please tell our audience a little bit more about your background in what FEAM is doing with respect to production of boron chemicals and supplying lithium chemicals as a co-product? And again, both being critical elements for the continuing growth and technological development of the modern economy here in the U.S. and the U.S.-friendly jurisdictions. Thanks, Paul.
Yeah, thanks, Shawn. And it's great to be here today. Appreciate the opportunity. So 5E has a project that's based in California. Our project sits about halfway between LA and Las Vegas. We have all of our major mining permits in place, and we sit on a very large multi-generational deposit of colemanite, colemanite being a very conventional borate mineral, which is a calcium-based mineral that's really, if you look at the 4 different types of boron minerals, colemanite is hands down kind of the Cadillac or Mercedes-Benz of boron mineralization, i.e. it's very easy to leach. My background, I've been at the company for, it's coming on about 4.5 years now. Joined the company in May of 2021, came on board for the first 3 years or so as the CFO, was involved with our direct listing and going public in the United States and listing on NASDAQ. And what drew me to 5E was really there's a ton of parallels from the boron market, kind of where it is today, and the lithium market 15 to 20 years ago. On the supply side, there's limitations. The lithium market was traditionally this oligopoly with about 3 or 4 global players. And similarly, the boron market, it's dominated by 2. And there's really good poolside demand thematics behind this market, requiring additional producers to enter the market. The market's growing, and it's right now quite constrained on the supply side. So it was the prospect of taking the company public and ultimately standing up a critical minerals project in Southern California.
Paul, this is Dmitry. Thank you for that overview. I'd like to follow up on what you said about the boron or the borate market. Can you tell our audience a little bit about sort of what are the end markets, main end markets that these products go into? What are some of the drivers of the current business environment and conditions? You mentioned the structure as being quite oligopolistic, but can you give us an idea of sort of what the size of the market is and what are some of the main drivers or end market growth vehicles?
Yeah, so the boron goes into like 300 plus applications. And so, similar to that lithium market where it was like, oh, the world's going to need electric vehicles. So that's going to be powered on lithium ion batteries, i.e. 1 + 1 = 2, which is more lithium ion batteries. The boron market is definitely a bit more opaque and kind of convoluted because boron goes into over 300 applications. And what's interesting is that many of those applications are absolutely critical and really make life as we know it exist. Boron it is the fifth element on the periodic table, so that has some really unique chemical properties. It's light, heat resistant, energy dense. It's also a micronutrient as well. And so you can dovetail that into kind of many different segments. It goes into some really boring materials, ceramics and cleaning supplies. When I was in college, I was using a solid base laundry detergent. That is indeed boron. It goes into all forms of glass, and this is LCD. So all the televisions we watch, textile fiberglass, as well as Pyrex glass. It is absolutely critical to glass manufacturing. You cannot make glass without the borates. And then it goes into really cool specialty applications. And so that is, third hardest material on planet Earth, boron carbide. That's what they use to make Kevlar and tank armor. It goes into ferroboron. So there's a ton of attention on the rare earth permanent magnets. Those permanent magnets do not have their high performance application without boron, albeit it's only about 2% of the magnet. But if you look at the CAGRs that are tied to AI or electric vehicles, the world's going to need a lot more permanent magnets, and that's going to require a lot more boron. And so you can kind of break these three segments into glasses growing at about 3.5%, 4%. Your non-glass applications, 4.5%, and your specialties at about 8%. And which the high drivers in those specialties is your permanent magnets are growing at 14, 15, 16% CAGRs. And so you kind of blend that all together, you're going to get a weighted average CAGR of about 5.5%. We're going to enter the market in the boric acid market. That's about 1.2 to 1.3 million tons a year, or metric tons a year. In which case we'll come online. The model assumes will be about 90,000 kind of in first year production, and we'll work that up to about 130,000 tons as we fully scale up and commission. And at the same time, this market is very much an oligopoly, where you have the second largest player being kind of a depleting mine, actually was up for strategic review, kind of announced at the end of August, and I think could be sold here, which creates a ton of uncertainty and opportunity in this market and need for a new market entrant.
Great, Paul. Thank you for that overview. I think it's very helpful for people to understand exactly which markets your products will be going into to help them understand what's going to be driving the growth going forward. Can we switch gears a little bit now and talk about kind of the industry in general? You mentioned it's a oligopoly, and a lot of new capacity will need to come online to meet this, mid to high single-digit demand growth that you've described. What's the importance, in your opinion, of establishing a domestic supply of boron and boron chemicals that, for now at least, it doesn't seem like it's the market that China is particularly focused on, but I'm sure it's only a matter of time. So how do you view your positioning as a U.S. producer and having a mine and a resource in the U.S.?
Sure. So our kind of vision and mission is to provide reliable upstream feedstock that kind of supports the U.S. industrial base. And then as we get up, and you can kind of view the boric acid as what's going to keep, that's going to pay the bills. But what can really give you kind of those turbo boost are the specialties. And that's where like China does not have a ton of upstream, but they dominate that midstream. So boron carbide is what's basically used to create the armor that the United States military needs. 85% of boron carbides comes out of China. So one way or another, China does have their seat at the table in the boron market. It's just not the upstream. They dominate that midstream. So I think for us, it's really important we get up and running because one, like the US is really susceptible today to a single point of failure in the borate market because 20% of global supply does come from the second largest producer. They are depleting and they have a very finite mine life that's known today. We would kind of focus our efforts on, especially like where we are geographically. We're about a 2.5 hour drive from the port of LA and Long Beach. We're going to focus on kind of reliably, this is phase one, providing reliable supply to the Western United States. And then we have a competitive advantage because it's not that expensive to get to Asia, but we're going to export a decent portion of our product, which is good for the American economy, right? So ultimately, we'll make more here in America, we'll hire here, we'll have an impact on GDP, but then we're going to export and other countries will buy our product. Some of them are definitely domestic manufacturers or US companies, but they have their manufacturing overseas. And so that's the kind of the value proposition we'll provide. And there's a need for a company like 5E to come in and be a new producer in the boron market.
Understood, Paul. So you mentioned that China does not really have a lot of boron reserves in the country, but they are, as you mentioned, 80% plus of the processing of the downstream chemicals. As you look to do something about that in terms of your own facilities and hopefully other facilities that will come online over time as well, what do you see some of the obstacles to domesticating the supply chain of boron and getting up into the precursors and sort of mid-market products? Is it capital access? Is it regulations? Is there sufficient talent in the U.S. To develop these types of operations, whether you're talking about mine or processing and refining capabilities? What are some of the obstacles that either you are facing directly or you think that the industry is facing overall in creating a boron supply chain in the U.S.?
Well, I can say that talking to our friends in DC, that this administration wants to be incredibly supportive and they want to help. But I think there's a ton of red tape still that exists in DC and that creates challenges. I think for the industry in general, permitting reform still has a long way to go. I think this administration has the right mentality, and I think they're going to try to solve that or make it easier here over the next 4 years. We're blessed. We have our permits. Ultimately, it comes down to, for us, capital. We want to get agency debt to build this project. Boron doesn't sit as a critical mineral today. Basically, the Trump administration will pass, or they're basically trying to create the tools to get cheaper agency facilities. But what ends up happening is kind of the qualification is do you sit on the critical minerals list? We sit on the Defense Department's critical mineral list, but not USGS. So that list came, a draft comment, or the draft list came out kind of late August, early September. Comments are due in 3 days. We will submit a very convincing public comment letter where we think boron has its place on that list. But I think that's for us is one of the challenges is like USGS has kind of been a bit of an ostrich, which with their head in the sand and not seeing that there's this single point of failure. The canary in the coal mine is already dead in the bottom of its cage, and like we're really like at risk of like losing our competitive advantage in the boron market if additional investment doesn't come into the 2 projects that are yet to be financed and have their permits and can come online that can basically, if built, help the U.S. maintain its position of strength for the foreseeable future.
Understood, Paul. And then just a final question before we end this this podcast. You mentioned, USGS and they're perhaps not moving fast enough to with respect to boron and recognizing the criticality of that material in our supply chain. What else do you think that the federal government or a state government for that matter can do to help facilitate the creation of a domestic supply chain for boron? Obviously regulations, streamlining regulations is a big part of that. We've seen direct investments that the government has made, whether it's in MP materials or the letter of intent that they put out there, looking to buy about 7,500 tons of cobalt and start building, a warehouse basically full of cobalt as a strategic reserve. How do you see the role of government in helping to facilitate the growth or the stability of the boron market in the U.S. and making sure that we don't lose that critical advantage that we have currently?
Yeah, so the U.S. government has 3 lists. The DoD has their list, the USGS has their list, and the DOE has their list. I think that all lists should get kind of equal opportunity for financing, and I think the Trump administration understands this, and they have a couple of additional tools. They have XM, which we've already qualified for XM. We got a letter of intent for a $285 million facility. So we are talking to XM. You have the Development Finance Corporation, which is the DFC, and the Office of Strategic Capital. I think what would be very good is if basically all tools in the toolbox are available on all 3 lists, because each different list targets, defense targets defense, energy targets energy, USGS is kind of more general. So I think that would help. I also think that, and there's whispers of this where, like, if you look at MP Materials 8K that they filed after the investment, Pete Hegseth was the signatory to that loan and that preferred equity agreement with MP. I don't know if the U.S. is, is Hegseth the chief investment officer? I don't know, and so I do think there needs to be partnerships with the private sector, specifically some of the big, large mining private equity funds. I think there was an article in Bloomberg where DFC may team up with the JV with Orion. Orion has already done this. This is Orion Resource Partners out of New York, which is a multi-billion-dollar mining private equity fund. They've teamed up with Saudi Arabia, and they're doing different kind of creative public partnerships. So I think on the investment side, because they're experts, Orion, whether it's Orion, Appian, RCF, they kind of have, not only do they have mining investment professionals, but they also have technical experts. So they can trust them to kind of decipher like the good from the bad, and then kind of the US government with their capital can maybe combine together, and then there could be a true public-private partnership between the US and the investment community that can really start to stand up projects in this space. And I think that would be really powerful in a major statement.
Thank you, Paul, for that very detailed answer. I appreciate your insights into this. Thank you very much for joining us for this podcast, helping our audience learn more about 5E advanced materials and the boron market specifically. I don't think it's a market that a lot of people are familiar with, so getting your take on that has been really helpful. I appreciate your time, and thank you for joining us.
Thanks. Have a great day.
So that'll wrap it up for the second installment of our WTR Symposium series. With critical elements, mining and processing infrastructure build out, a matter of national security. I'd like to thank the management from today's participating companies, including Jindalee Lithium, Critical Metals Corporation, Tactical Resources, and 5E Advanced Materials, as well as Atlas Lithium, whose responses will be included in the written report, which we will publish following the symposium. I'd also like to thank my research colleague, Dmitry Silversteyn, for hosting this symposium. And finally, special thanks to the producer and editor of the symposium podcast, my WTR colleague, Joe Brunetto. Thank you again for listening, everyone, and don't forget to subscribe, as well as visiting www.watertowerresearch.com, where you can stay up to date on the company's written research reports, podcasts, fireside chats, and conference schedules. And as a reminder, that's all open access for everybody. We'll see you next time for the WTR Symposium Series podcast. Thank you, everyone.